Welcome back. This is a continuation of the previous part. If you haven't seen it, click in the banner above and come back to this video. So in the last video we had just finished the edit person function, and now it's time to move on to the search person. So as it says in the comments, we want to first check if people are in the system, get the input, validate the name, loop and check the name, output the results to the screen, and finally return back to the menu. So let's start with the first one. If the people.count equals 0, then we can print a message saying there are no users in the system. And if this returns false, that means there must be users in the system. So now we've accomplished the first one, we can move on, and it's time to get the name input. So what we can do CW tab, remove the right, and just say enter name, and then create a string variable, name input equals console.readline. Perfect, so now we've generated the name input by outputting the value, enter a name, and then reading everything after the colon. And then now that we have our name input, we can validate the name. And we validate the name by simply doing string.isNull or empty that we used previously. And just a quick recap, all this will do is check if the string is equal to this or it's equal to this. And what we want to do right now is check if it's not either of these two options. So if it's not null or empty, and the value that we're checking is name input, then we can proceed. And just to cover the error bracket right now, if you do enter empty string or the variable happens to be null, then it's going to come into this bracket. And what we can do, we could say output message, please enter a name. And then we can recall the function, which is called search person, and that'll loop back around to the top. And because we only have a success path and a failure path, we want to move finish option into here. So we've entered the name, we validated it, looped around the function just in case they enter something bad that we don't want to process, e.g. it's null or empty. So now we validated the name, now we just need to loop around and actually search for the name they entered. So we have two ways of doing this. We can write our traditional for loop that looks something like this, int I equals 0, I is smaller than the people.count, and then I++ is our incremental variable, and then inside here we can do an if statement. And what this if statement will compare is the value that's inside people with the name input that we just retrieved from the user's console. So first we can say people. In order to access a position inside the people list, we can do the square brackets. And then because our identifier in this for loop is I, we can place I inside. And then the property we want to compare is name, so we can type .name. And then what we can do instead is we can say to lower, so we don't have to deal with lowercase and uppercase. So ABBA will still be able to match a user with a capital A, and that's the preferred option to do searches because not everyone will remember to type the capital letters. So now what this if statement says, we retrieve back the person in the loop, we get their name, we convert it to a lowercase, and then we say does it contain the value that the user has inputted, which is name input. If this has returned true, they must have found a match. So what we could do here inside all of these successes is we can say CW tab, and then simply just return the person that we found. So in this case, if this matches, then the user that we found is people I. And let's just type that into here. We don't need an else clause because if we haven't found the user, then we don't really care about the else because we're only searching. We don't want to be outputting a message every single time because that's going to clog up the screen. So we only want to print to the screen if we found a match. Let's just see how this works. So if we print users, we can see we have two users in here, ABBA and test. So let's return to the menu and try option 4, search user, press enter, now we enter a name, ABBA, and then we can see we've actually hit an error. So what's happened is it's printed out one line, which is technically correct, but what's happened is it's trying to print the object, and the object here is actually a person. We don't want to print the person, we want to do print return details of the person. And if you remember, return details, if you use control click, takes you to the function, it's the name, and then a hyphen, and then the age. Now if you press this back arrow top left, we can jump back to the code where we're at. So now that it should be working, let's try it again. Do search, now we type in ABBA, and we can see that we searched for the people, and we found someone. Now if you run it again, and search test, you can see that even though it's a lowercase t, it still matches. Now if we try a partial match like AB, you'll see it still finds it, because we're searching for contains. If you wanted to make it directly equal to, then you can change this to equals, and then if we use search, now we have to type in ABBA, and then it will appear. if we don't use the full string and do a partial match again, then you see no users came up. So that's up to you. I normally go for contains because sometimes you might not remember the exact username, or you might miss off some letters or numbers and you might not get the results back that you need. Doing equals ensures that it has to be exactly equal to what the user typed in, but obviously we're using the 2 lower, so it's the lowercase version. And also, if you wanted to keep this the same, you can also convert the name input to lower as well. Because if they've typed in ABBA, and then we're comparing it with a lowercase name, then you don't want to have this ambiguity. You want to make sure everything's on lowercase, so when you compare them, they should be equal to each other, or at least it'll contain that exact string. And now let's just try and trigger this bracket just to make sure our error works. So in order to trigger that, we need to make sure our string is null or empty. So we can just not type anything in and just press enter. So if we use 4 and press enter again, it says please enter a name, press enter to try again. We press enter and it just simply loops around again, which is perfect. So if we type in 4 and then we type in 123, obviously no users match 123, but it just doesn't look like anything's happened. So what we could do in here maybe is we could define a boolean. It says be found equals false. And then we can write an if statement that says if not be found, then we can print out a user saying no user found with that name. And then inside the for loop, we're going to have to set the value for be found. So if any of these lines execute, whether it executes 1 or 100 times, we'll always execute this line if we found a match. So if we found a match, we want to toggle this be found to true. So after we've toggled be found to true, if we have found a match, then it'll skip over this line because this is if it's not be found. And we don't need an else in this if statement here because we only want to run this code if we haven't found any users. So maybe we could say no users found with that name. So now if you run it again, type in 4 and just make sure it still works. So ABBA will find a match, but if we press enter, go back and try AB, it'll still find a match because we're using contains. And now if we try to do something completely random, 123, says no users found. The reason why I added this message in is if you try and search for an item but nothing appears and it doesn't tell you what's happened, you may think there's something wrong with the system, so it's always best to let the user know. So now that we've finished the search user option, let's move on to remove user. So let's follow the same approach, check if the people are in the system, equals 0, and then we can output there are no users in the system. And then if there are users in the system, we can output a list of users, which is perfect because we have our print all users function that already does this for us. It goes from 0 to the people count and it just prints a list. Print all users. So we've done this one, and now we have an input selection and a validate section. So we can do CW tab and remove the line, and then we can say enter and index. And then we want to put in int index equals convert to int32, and the value you want to convert is a console read line. Perfect. So the console read line will return as a string, which will be what the users typed in after the colon, and then we'll convert that to int32 and store it into our int index. So that's our input selection, and now we need to validate it. So our integer needs to be between the lower bound of our people list and the upper bound. So the lower bound is 0, and the upper bound is the count minus 1. So we can say if index is greater than or equal to 0, that covers our lower bound, and to introduce upper bound check-in, we'll put an and say if the index is less than or equal to the people.count minus 1. And the reason why it's minus 1 is because our people count starts at 0 and goes to 1 because we only have 2 items in there. So that's 1, 2 items, so the count is 2, but the last index position is 1 because this list is 0 based. Now the problem with using index straight from the console is this print all users will start the list at index number 1. So the user will be choosing index based off 1 and 2, but we really want them to be based off 0 and 1. So the thing we can do here is after it's converted, we could do a minus 1, or on the next line, alternatively, we could do index minus minus, which I prefer, but it's up to you. So now that we've converted the value from a string to an integer into a 1 based list, now we've converted it to a 0 based list, so now it's ready for the conversion. So we can check if it's at the lower bound, which is 0, and then it's at the upper bound, which is the people.count, minus the 1, as shown here. Now that the variable has been validated, which is this selection, then now we can print the message in order to simply remove the person. So if they've validated it and they've selected it, then all we need to do here is actually simply remove the person. So let's see what we have available. If we do people followed by a dot, we have a remove at function. And remove at removes the element at the specified index. We have other remove functions at the bottom. For example, remove, you can give it a specific person that you want to remove, but in this case we just have an index. We have remove all that will give you a function that you can match with. Remove at is what we'll be using because it gives you an index. And you can actually do remove range, so you can say from range 0 to range 5 we want to delete them. But in this case we don't want to do any of them except for remove at, because we already have our index ready. So we can say people.remove our index, and then we could just do our CW tab, removed a person. And now we can move our finish option inside here. Calling finish option means we've done the task that we need to do, and then we're ready to return to the menu. But now we actually want to have an else clause, because what if they enter a value that's outside of this range? So we could do output message, enter a valid index inside the range. And then we can print that message out and then just recall this function, which is remove person. So let's just give this a test. So first let's use option 1 to check who's in the system. We have aberrant test, press enter return back, press 5 to go inside remove user, and now we have our two options. So let's select option 2, successfully remove the person, press enter to go back to the menu. Now if I press 1 again, you'll see that test has now officially gone. And let's just remove the second user just to make sure. And now they're gone as well. So if we try and print all, you can see there are no users in the system. Use option 1 to create a user. Then we can add a user if you want to and get them back into the system. There we go. So that's our search feature done. Now let's test the feature that we haven't tested right now, which is exit. So if we press 6, press enter, then the menu just keeps printing. Let's have a look and see what's going on. So after we've parsed our menu option, and then we broke off each of them, so there's no bracket for else if 6, because we don't have a function to call if the program is simply just ending. So regardless of which option you go into, you always print the menu again. We don't actually want that. We only want to print the menu again if the menu option is between 1 and between 5. So we can say if menu option is greater than or equal to 1 and the menu option is less than or equal to 5, then we can print the menu option. Let's wrap this in curly braces. That would be the only condition that we'd want to loop around and print the menu. Let's try this again. Press 6, and then we hit a new line, and then that's it, our program's finished. And where that new line is actually in the main right at the bottom, which is this new line that we haven't hit in a long time. So we can have a message here that just says goodbye. Now if you run it again and try use option 6, then it just says goodbye, and you can press enter and close down the program. So I think our people management system is now complete. If you want to see ways and how we can optimize this further, then please stick around. So in all of the main functions inside here, we have this people.count equals 0, and we seem to have this everywhere. We have it in the print, we have it in the edit, we have it in the search, and we have it in the remove, and it's essentially exactly the same thing. So let's try and make a function that will return us back a true or false to determine whether we need to do anything. So just after the return person function, we can make a new function which say public void is system empty. And actually we don't want to be returning void because this needs to be a true or false. So we can return back a boolean. And then inside here we can say if people.count equals 0, then we can do something, and else we can do something else. So this function says, is the system empty? So if we return true, that means it is empty. So if the people count is 0, that means it's empty. So what we can do here is print out a message. CW tab, and let's go and take what we've already got above. Any of these will do. There are no users in the system. Maybe we'll leave it just like that. We can cut that out and paste it at the bottom. There are no users in the system. Add a full stop at the end. And then we can return true right here, because it is true that the system is indeed empty. And if this system is not empty, we'll be in this else clause, and from here we can return false. Now let's try and make use of these functions one by one, just to make sure that we don't mess up the code. So the simplest bit of code is actually to print all, because it's only a short function. It's like 6 lines of code. So let's see how we can implement this new function. So what we can do is we can start by simply just calling it is system empty. And then because we want it to start off as being empty, then let's just initialize our list to being empty just so it triggers it immediately. Let's go to the print all, and once you press 1, it immediately says there are no users in the system. That's perfect. So now what's happened is we're actually returning a bool, but we're not doing anything with it. So what we can do is we can say, is the system empty? And if the system's empty, we don't actually need to do anything because we've already output the message. So we can say, if the system is not empty, and then if the system is not empty, then we can place print all users inside here. So let's run it again and see what happens. Print all users, we can type in 1, and it says there are no users in the system, and they'll actually just skip over this print all users because this will return false. So it'll jump out, it'll finish the option. So let's just go ahead and add a user using option 2, other 23, and then let's go back to print all users. Now when we call is system empty, it's going to jump away from this because the count is now 1, and then it's going to return false, and therefore this statement is going to pass because it's checking if this value is indeed false, and then it's going to print all the users. So now we've reduced the code to simply just these lines. And now we can go make all the other sections simple like this. So all we need to do is include this section just here, and then the success code inside. So let's see how that works. So our add person doesn't actually use this. Let's scroll down to our edit right here. So we can actually remove this entire clause because we don't need to do that check anymore. And then we could say if not is system empty. There we go. And now let's just run that and make sure that everything's okay. Edit user, they're not using the system. Now it's jumped back out to here, but it actually hasn't cleared the console or anything. So let's see what we can do about that. So that means that in this if statement here, when we bounce around in the else, it's going to check if the system's empty, and this curly brace here will make us print they are not using the system, and then return false. And if it returns false, it should come back into this else. When it comes back into this else, we need to clear the console, but first let's just do a console.readline, and then we can do a console.clear. We hit F5, and then let's try again, 3 edit user, there are no users in the system, and if we press enter, it returns us back. So if we change this to output message with empty quotes, let's see what happens. Now it kind of works. It says press enter, try again, but we actually have a blank line here because we've added that space in that function output message right here. So maybe what we can do is we can say if the message is equal to nothing, then instead of printing a console write line, maybe we can just print a console write. So let's keep that message in there already, and then if the message is equal to nothing, then we can do a console write, and then we could just say press enter to try again. Another way you can write this, when you're comparing a string value, you can actually say dot equals and then put that in the quotes. And if you didn't want to use the quotes instead, you can actually say string.empty. That's just a little tip. Just to see how that looks like, you got string equals equals quotes. You can even have message equals equals string.empty. It's really up to you what you want to do. Some people prefer to use string.empty instead of typing in the empty quotes, just because it looks a bit cleaner in the code. Anyway, so let's give this a try and see what happens. Now if we try and press 3, now we have this. So we can press enter to try again. And actually in this case, it's not really try again, it's actually return back to the menu. Press enter to turn to the menu. We try it again, press enter to return the menu. Perfect. Right, and then let's do it for the search user now. So now let's follow that same approach. So we had an else with just an output message with empty quotes. So in our search, we can get rid of this. Change this else to if not is string empty. And then follow this curly brace down. If you just click on the curly brace, it'll highlight the other end. And then we can type in else. And we can just say output message and then empty quotes. And let's just try it quickly for this one. We have search, there are no users in the system, press enter to return to the menu. Perfect. Now let's exit and just do it for the remove. And again for this one, place this if is system empty, click on the curly brace, follow it down, write your else, and do output message, and then put your empty quotes in, and that should be it. Now if you press 5, we can see no users in the system, press enter, and then let's just add some users and make sure this all works. Successfully removed a person, and let's just add another one, And then let's try and search to make sure that still works okay, which it does. And if we do search again and just do a partial search, and that's all working fine. And now we can exit the system. Another thing you can do to the menu, instead of writing all of these options as console write lines, you can actually add them into a string array, and then you can print them to the console. Because now if I add more options, I have to keep duplicating this and changing this one to 6, and this will be the new function name. And then now the problem is this will have to be updated. And then if I have a 7, I'll have to continuously update the amount of items that I have, because then that'll mess up the exit feature. So what we can do to try and fix this and make it a little bit easier to add features in the future, we can type in string plus empty square brackets, which will tell the compiler that we want to create an array of strings. And then we can just call this menu options equals new string, and then the square brackets. So we haven't actually gave it how many strings we want, because what we can do now is we can insert the curly braces after it. And what these curly braces will do is, just as we had here, we can actually type our own strings in. So there's no point in typing in a number, because we can deal with that in the for loop. So let's just type in these options. So empty quotes, comma, and then if you just press Ctrl D, so we have 6 items, so 4 more times, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we can just copy and paste these inside. Perfect. And now let's just get rid of this. All of the menu items are now gone. Now, in order to print everything out, we can do a for loop. Say int I equals 0, I is smaller than the menu options dot length, and we're doing I++. The reason why we're doing length in this case is because we have a static array. If we have a static array, we can't add or remove things from it. We can only have that many options, which in this case is 6. So when you're dealing with arrays, you're dealing with length. When you're dealing with lists, because they're dynamic, you use .count. That's just something to note. So we can follow the same approach. We can do CW tab tab. We can add our I plus the 1 plus a full stop space and then a plus, and then what we want to do is actually just output the menu option that we're up to. So we use square bracket I, and that should really be it. So let's just give that a test. Now you should see it should look identical, because all we've changed is the ability to add other stuff. So now you can see that our code is slightly broken, because I've just tried to add 6 and it won't exit the code. Before we move on to that, let's just fix this first. So let's see what's going on with that exit. Now we have 7 in here because of what I did before, so we can just change that back to 5, because that was just a typo from earlier on. And if we press 6, now it says goodbye. Now, what I was saying about the menu options being good, that we're using the arrays, is because we have a menu options.length. Now, our menu options.length will give us the position last. So we actually want to -1 of that, so we can disinclude the index for the exit. Because right now, if we have 6 positions in there, then it's 0 to 5. So therefore, when we add 1 to all of the indexes, it's actually from 1 to 6. So now we're saying if the menu option is greater than or equal to 1, and the menu option is smaller than or equal to minus the 1, then we're good. And the reasoning for this is right now, our menu options has 6 options in, which means it goes 0 to 5. But when our user selects the menu options, they're actually selecting it based off of 1 based index. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In essence, it's actually going from 1 to 6. So the menu options.length is actually 6. And we want to only restrict the options to 1, 5. Our lower bracket is 1, as it says here, and our upper bracket is the length, which is 6, and then -1, which will return us back to 5. And now, as you can see, if I actually add something else to this and just spam this last option, hopefully when I type in 11, this will still say goodbye. I know these don't exist, but this is just a demonstration. If these were additional features right now, then exit would still work by typing 11, because our new code is using the length rather than a fixed value like before when it was just 6. Now let's just undo these and get the system back to normal. And let's just make sure that all the options work properly. So just to round up this video series, let's just have a recap of everything that we've done. So we have a main function, which is our entry point. And this code is just used to test our person class before we moved on to the manager class, so you can ignore this. In the main, it's very simple. We make an instance of the manager, and the constructor inside the manager is what runs the entire program. And if you really wanted to, because this says here that we actually haven't really used the manager variable, you can actually leave it like this, and the program will still work fine. Because all we're simply doing is making use of the manager class, but we're not really using manager dot anything specifically, so we didn't actually need to have the variable in there, so it doesn't really matter. So as you can see, it still works fine. So if you want to keep it like that, it's up to you. And then after we've exited the menu using option 6, or whatever the exit option is, then we have a goodbye, and then it just waits at this read line so the program doesn't end immediately. As you can see here, the cursor's just waiting there flashing, and as soon as you press enter, the program closes. So that's our main complete. Let's check our person. Our person definition is quite simple. So we have two properties, a string name and int age. They both have public gets and protected sets. That means we can only change the value inside class person, not externally. So inside the constructor, we just have a string name, int age, and our properties just get initialized. And this is used in several cases, but when we want to return the details of a person, it just has name plus a hyphen plus the age. If you wanted to write this differently, you could write a $sign followed by quotation marks, and then it would be name hyphen age. But this will just print out name hyphen age. So to make this read the variables, you can add these curly braces around it, and you can see that it goes white. There you go. And them two lines are effectively exactly the same thing, and you can do that if you really want to. It's up to you. It's just whatever fits best for you. This way you kind of avoid having to do a plus several times. Make sure you don't miss the spaces. This looks more like a sentence, but you just got to remember to use the $sign plus the curly braces. Anyway, so this will return details. We can call set name and set age. So that's the class person. And now where all the bulk of the code lives is in the manager. So we have our public list of people. We initialize the list. This was just used for our test data, so we didn't have to create multiple users. So we could just remove this and keep the semicolon here and just get rid of these. But I'm going to keep it in. And then immediately after creating our people list, we just print the menu. Printing the menu will actually kickstart the entire system. We have a string array full of menu options, and they're the menu options that have just been defined inside our code. Then we print out welcome to the management system. We loop through the menu options, adding 1 dot, then the menu option, then 2 dot, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. And then we let the user enter a menu option. We try and pass their value. If the try pass has been successful, we'll check which option they've selected and call the relevant function. And if they're between the first option and the second last option, then we'll print the menu again. If they're at the last option, which will always be exit, then the program will close and it won't print the menu again. If for whatever reason they enter a value like high or something that's not a number, then it'll come into this code and it'll say incorrect menu choice, and then we can print the menu again. So for option 1, it will do print all. Our start option function and our finish option function you'll see in all of the other options, so let's just go through them. The start option will just clear the console, and then it will print whatever message we give it plus an environment new line. So in this case, it's cleared the console at the start of this function, printing all users, and then placed a new line just so it gives it a bit of a gap. And then in our isSystemEmpty function, it just says if the people count is 0, then we print this lovely message and return true. Else, we return false to indicate that the system is not empty. So if the system is not empty, then we can print all the users, which will therefore be the whole point in this print all function. And then in our finish option, all that will do is it'll print this generic message saying that we finished, and you can press enter to return back to the menu, and then we do a read line to wait, hence the press enter, and then we do a console clear. Let's go back using the top left navigate backward, and then that's it for the print all. It's not really that complicated. For our add person, we're using the start option again, and then we have a try catch in here because something could go wrong in the return person function, and let's have a look at what that involves. So you enter a name. This bit will go fine because entering strings could mean anything. You could type in this for a name and it'd still be fine. Strings can be anything because they're just characters. The problematic line is actually this one. If you were to type in characters in here, then this will cause an exception and the program will close, except we're now using a try catch, so that catch will catch this exception, and will stop the program from closing down and losing all of our data. After we've read in both of the values, we check the name input and make sure that it's null or empty. And then if it isn't, then we continue on. We check if the age input is a sensible age, and then we can return a person at that point using the two values that we've just read in from the console. If any of these options fail, if the age is not a sensible range, that we can output this menu and then let them know, so then they know what to do next time. And also for the name, if they don't have anything that we can validate, like if they didn't enter a name, because therefore it was equal to null, or it's empty, then we just let them know. And if any of these channels go wrong, like the output message channels, then we return back null. So we have a success path inside here and a failure path inside here. So the reason why we have, so if we just keep pressing the back arrow, yep, there we go. So the reason why we have if it's not equal to null, because if this function returns back successfully, then the person object will actually contain something. Because we had down below in the return person function, we had a return new person if it was in the success path, therefore it will go into here. It will then add the person, print a message, and then finish the option. Now if this person is null, as you can see when we have it at the bottom of the function here, return null, that means something has went wrong. If something's went wrong, then we can output a message and then just loop around in the function. And also if this causes an exception, which will be from the user entering a letter for a number, then it will also say something was went wrong and it'll loop around the function. When we're trying to edit a person, the same procedure as well. We edit a user and we just print this message out. We just run the function to make sure the system is not empty. We print out all the users, we get the index, and we convert it from a 1-based index to a 0-based index by running index selection --. We can check the range to make sure it's in the right order, and then we can return a person, and then we can use this code right here to edit. So we're saying in the people object, the index that we're selecting is the index selection, and we want to replace it with the person that has been returned up here. We output a message, and then we do finish option. If something were to go wrong, then we can output both of these messages right here. We can output this message right here, and then loop again, and the same thing for the catch exception. And also if they have a bad range, then we can print it out here and return back. And if something goes wrong in the outer exception, then we can also loop back again. And if the system is indeed empty, then all this message will print is that you can press enter to return back to the menu. And again, the same thing for the user. For the search person, we just print a message at the start, check if the system's empty, let them enter a name, and then we loop through all of the items in the people object, and we check the name, the to-lower of it, and if it contains the name that they just typed in from the console on this line. If we do find a match, then we print that user's detail to the console and set bFound to true, and our bFound variable is used down here. If we don't find any users, then it'll print this message to let the user know, hey, we've tried, but we can't find anything. And if it's set to true, then it'll skip over this because we have users printed out, so we don't need to tell them anything. And then we can finish the option, and for whatever reason the user doesn't type a name properly, then we can print out this message and let them know. If there's no user in the system, then this message will just tell the user that they need to go back to the menu. And last but not least, our remove person. We have a removing a user, check the system, print the users, convert the index to a 0-based index, check the count, and then we use our remove at, and because we've got an index, this is very easy. You have other remove functions available, but remove at is by far the easiest when you use a direct index. So we return the person, return a message just to let them know, and we can finish the option. And if they haven't made sure that they've typed a number in the right range, then we'll print that to them and then loop around in the function. And again, if there's no users in the system, this will just tell you to return back to the menu. We've had a look at finish option and start option previously, so let's just have a quick look at output message. This is the case here in this first bit where I just mentioned like this bit right here. So if the output message is equal to nothing, which is just string.empty, then it'll just say press enter to return to the menu. Now if it does contain something, so it'll skip over this and go inside here, it will print your message out and then press enter to try again. This is used when we have errors. So for example, right here, enter a valid index inside the range, press enter to try again, it will hit this read line, and then it will hit the clear, it will loop back around, and it will start the function again with a clear console screen so it doesn't flood the output. and the last couple of functions, we have a print all users. It goes from 0 to people.count, and then it'll just print out all the users using a 1 based index, and that's it. It will just return all of the users in the system. Return a person will take in a name, an age, it'll validate them, and then return a new person, and then return null. And the last but not least, we have is system empty. If the people count is 0, we print a simple message and return true, because it will be empty if the count is 0, and if the count isn't 0, then it returns false, because is the system empty? False, because we're inside the else, which means the value has to be something other than 0, and it can only be positive. So I think that marks the end of this video series. I'll update all the code to GitHub so you can check out the entire source code. I hope you enjoyed this series. If you have any other interesting projects that you want me to check out and do for you guys, then please leave suggestions in the comments below and I'll get around to doing them. Thank you for tuning in. I know this has been a long series, but it has been very practical and there's a lot of learning involved in this program. Thank you for watching. I'm going to be making a C# course coming up soon, so keep your eye out. In the meantime, if you want to check out my Patreon to support the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it.